The restaurant was the kind of place that seemed to hum with quiet luxury. Golden chandeliers shimmered above white linen tables, and soft jazz floated through the air like perfume. Every detail whispered wealth: crystal glasses, silver cutlery, the muted laughter of people who didn't need to check prices before ordering. At a corner table, Aaron sat with perfect posture, his tailored shirt crisp against his skin, his cufflinks glinting in the candlelight. Across from him sat Michelle, his girlfriend, his newest obsession, and, in many ways, the reflection of the life he'd built. She was the kind of woman who photographed well in every light, elegant, poised, and visibly proud to be seen with him. She smiled as she lifted her wine glass. "To us," she said. Aaron's lips curved into a polite smile, but his eyes were already somewhere else. He raised his glass halfway, but before the words could leave his mouth, something shifted, something in the air, in the rhythm of the evening, in the part of his heart that had long gone silent. He looked toward the restaurant entrance. And there she was. Rachel. The world around him blurred. The sound of forks clinking, the hum of conversation, even Michelle's laughter, all of it dissolved into the background. Rachel stood framed by the warm glow of the chandelier. Her black dress flowed like water, soft and simple yet undeniably regal. She wasn't wearing luxury, yet somehow she carried it within her. Her hand rested gently on her rounded belly, a quiet, sacred gesture that made the entire room pause in his mind. Aaron's heart stumbled. 5 years had passed since he'd seen her. 5 years since he walked out of their small apartment with nothing but a duffel bag and an apology that didn't deserve to be called one. And now she was here. Pregnant. Glowing. Peaceful. He swallowed hard, his fingers tightening around the stem of his glass. The weight of years he had buried beneath work and success began to shift inside him. Michelle followed his gaze and turned slightly, her golden hair brushing her shoulder. Her eyes landed on Rachel just as a waiter guided her toward a table a few steps away. "She's beautiful," Michelle said casually, unaware of the storm in his chest. "Is she someone you know?" Aaron hesitated. His throat felt dry. "We used to," he managed to say. Michelle smiled faintly and went back to cutting her salmon, but her instincts were sharper than her tone suggested. She had seen something flicker in his expression, something she couldn't yet name. Aaron tried to steady himself, to pull back into the rhythm of conversation, but his mind refused to obey. He heard Michelle's voice as though it came through water, muffled and distant. All he could see was Rachel, sitting down gracefully, thanking the waiter, smoothing her dress as she adjusted her chair. She hadn't noticed him yet. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to study her face. Time had added something to her beauty, a depth, a serenity that success could never replicate. She didn't look broken. She didn't look bitter. She looked whole. And that realization burned deeper than anything he could have imagined. He remembered the night he left her. The smell of rain leaking through their cracked window. The argument that started small and ended with words that couldn't be unsaid. Rachel had been crying quietly, one hand on the dinner plate she'd just made for him, her voice trembling as she said, "You're chasing something that's already killing us." And he, standing there in the dark, had said what he thought was courage but was only pride, "I need more than this." He'd walked out, convinced that leaving her was a step toward greatness. Convinced that one day, success would fill the emptiness she left behind. But sitting here now, staring at her from across the restaurant, Aaron realized something he couldn't put into words: success had given him everything except peace. Rachel finally lifted her gaze from the menu. Their eyes met. The world stopped moving. There were no fireworks, no sudden gasp from the room, just silence, a shared heartbeat suspended in time. Her expression didn't harden, nor did it soften. It was calm. Knowing. A quiet recognition of a story that had already ended. She held his gaze for only a moment, then gave a faint nod, a gesture so simple it tore through him like confession. Aaron exhaled, but the air felt heavy. Michelle's voice pulled him back. "Aaron," she said, gently this time. "You're staring." He blinked and looked down at his plate. The salmon had gone cold. "Who is she?" Michelle asked softly after a pause. He could have lied. It would have been easy, say she was an old friend, a colleague, anyone but who she truly was. But something about seeing Rachel again had already stripped him of the urge to pretend. "She's my ex-wife," he said quietly. Michelle froze mid-bite. "You're what?" Aaron's voice was steady but low. "We were married. A long time ago." Michelle set her fork down, her gaze searching his face. "You never told me that." "It's not something I like to talk about," he replied, his tone careful, distant. Her lips parted as though she wanted to say more, but instead, she looked toward Rachel's table. The truth was undeniable. The way he looked at her, the quiet ache in his eyes, was not the gaze of a man indifferent to the past. "And now she's pregnant," Michelle said finally, her voice neither accusing nor soft, just factual, like a revelation that didn't need to be questioned. Aaron nodded faintly. "Yeah. Looks like it." Silence settled again. Around them, the restaurant continued its rhythm, waiters moving gracefully, glasses clinking, laughter floating from other tables. But at theirs, time had stopped. Rachel ate slowly, occasionally smiling at the waiter or at something on her phone. She carried herself with a gentleness that spoke of inner stillness, not the fragile kind, but the sort that comes from surviving heartbreak and finding something sacred beyond it. Aaron's chest tightened as he watched her. There had been a time when she looked at him like that, like he was home. Michelle followed his gaze again. She didn't speak this time. She simply sighed and turned away, her posture suddenly smaller, her confidence dimmed by something she didn't want to name. When Rachel finished her meal, she rose gracefully from her chair. The black dress moved around her like liquid shadow, her hand still protectively resting over her stomach. She glanced briefly in Aaron's direction, just a passing glance, nothing more, and walked toward the exit. No confrontation. No bitterness. Only peace. Aaron's eyes followed her until the restaurant door closed behind her. For a long while, he sat there, lost in thought, long after she had gone. Michelle finally broke the silence. "Do you still love her?" Her words landed softly, but they carried the weight of truth. Aaron didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened. He looked at her, the woman who represented everything he had built, and for the first time, it all looked like an illusion. "I don't know," he said quietly. Michelle nodded once, her face expressionless, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of sadness. "Then maybe you should find out." She didn't say another word after that. When they left the restaurant, the city night greeted them with its cool breath and glittering skyline. Aaron walked Michelle to her car, his hands deep in his pockets, his thoughts elsewhere. They exchanged a quiet good night. Michelle's smile was kind, but distant, like a door gently closing. When her car disappeared into the traffic, Aaron stood alone on the sidewalk, watching the reflection of lights on wet pavement. He thought of Rachel. Of their first apartment, small and full of laughter. Of the dreams they'd built when all they had was faith in each other. Of how easily he'd traded that for ambition. The city that once made him feel powerful now looked hollow. He returned to his penthouse, a place of glass, marble, and silence. From the window, the city stretched endlessly beneath him, yet he had never felt smaller. He poured himself a drink, staring at the amber liquid swirling in the glass. Somewhere across town, Rachel was probably asleep, her hand resting over her stomach, dreaming of a life that no longer had anything to do with him. Aaron took a slow sip, then set the glass down untouched. For the first time in years, he wished success had someone to share it with. And for the first time in longer than that, he whispered a name he thought he'd forgotten. Rachel. That night, the lights of the city glittered like gold, but none of it could reach the shadow in his heart. He had everything he'd ever wanted, except the one thing he'd lost the moment he stopped believing love was enough. 3 weeks passed, but Rachel's face never left Aaron's mind. It lingered in boardrooms, in traffic, in his reflection every morning when he buttoned his shirt. The sight of her that night, calm, radiant, at peace, had torn through every lie he had ever told himself about moving on. He had built an empire since leaving her. He had the kind of wealth that made others listen when he spoke, the kind of influence he once dreamed of having. Yet every success now felt strangely hollow. He'd thought he wanted admiration. But what he missed most was being known. It was a Thursday evening when fate intervened again. Aaron was attending a private charity gala, one of those glittering events filled with people who smiled too perfectly and laughed too strategically. The walls of the gallery glowed under golden light, the paintings hung like silent witnesses to human vanity. Michelle wasn't there this time. She had stopped returning his calls 2 weeks earlier. The last thing she'd said was, "I don't think you're ready to be loved by anyone who isn't her." She had been right. He'd tried to push Rachel out of his thoughts, but she remained, not as a ghost, but as a mirror. Every time he looked into his life, he saw her absence. He moved through the crowd, greeting donors and politicians, nodding politely through conversations about investments and partnerships. Yet beneath the noise, a quiet loneliness followed him like a shadow. Then, just as he reached for another glass of champagne, he heard her laugh. Soft. Familiar. Disarming. He froze. The sound traveled through him like memory made flesh. He turned, scanning the room. And there she was again. Rachel stood near a painting of a mother holding a child, the light of the canvas reflecting softly on her face. Her belly was more pronounced now, the glow of late pregnancy giving her an almost ethereal presence. She was speaking to an older couple, smiling gently, one hand resting protectively over her stomach. Aaron felt his throat tighten. For a moment, he just watched, unsure whether to approach or disappear before she noticed him. But something inside him refused to run this time. He walked toward her slowly, his steps deliberate, heart pounding harder than it had in years. Rachel saw him before he reached her. Her expression didn't falter. She finished her sentence with a calm grace, thanked the couple she was speaking with, and turned to face him. There was no bitterness in her eyes, no surprise either. Only quiet understanding, as if she had known this meeting would come eventually. "Rachel," Aaron said softly. She nodded once. "Aaron." They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them heavy with unspoken years. He searched for the right words, but none came. Everything he wanted to say felt too small. "You look," he began, then stopped. Rachel smiled faintly. "Different." "Happy," he said. She tilted her head. "I am." The simplicity of her answer cut through him. There was no resentment there, no invitation either, just truth. "Congratulations," he added, glancing at her stomach. "You're expecting?" "Yes," she replied softly. 7 months. "That's wonderful," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know you." "You wouldn't," she interrupted gently. "We haven't spoken in years." Her tone wasn't sharp, just honest. Aaron nodded slowly. "You look good, Rachel." "You really do." "Thank you," she said, her hand absently brushing over her belly. "You look successful." He laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "I guess I've become that." They fell silent again. Around them, the gala moved on, waiters gliding past with trays, laughter rising from corners of the room, the music swelling softly. Yet in that space between them, the world felt still. Rachel looked at the painting behind him, the one with the mother and child. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "There's something sacred about it." Aaron turned to look too. "Yeah," he said quietly. "There is." He wanted to ask if she was happy. If she'd found someone new. But the questions felt selfish, and the fear of the answers kept him silent. Instead, he asked, "Are you still teaching?" She smiled, and something in his chest stirred, that small, familiar spark of warmth he hadn't felt in years. "Yes," she said. "Still at the same school." "It's small, but the kids make it worth it. I think that's what I was meant to do, to build people, not things." Aaron lowered his gaze. "I remember you saying that once." "You laughed at me," she said softly, a faint smile on her lips. He sighed. "I laughed because I didn't understand. Back then, all I could see was the next deal, the next promotion. I thought peace came after success." Rachel nodded slowly. "And now?" He met her eyes. "Now I know success without peace is just noise." Her expression softened, but she said nothing. He wanted to tell her everything, how empty his life felt, how his nights were haunted by regret, how seeing her that night at the restaurant had undone years of pretending. But he didn't know where to begin. "I wasn't expecting to see you again," he said finally. Rachel smiled gently. "Neither was I. But I believe people cross paths again when there's something left unfinished." Her words hung in the air like prophecy. Aaron took a breath. "There's a lot I never said. A lot I should have said." She looked at him quietly, waiting. He swallowed hard. "When I left, I told myself I was doing you a favor, that I was giving you a chance at a better life. But that wasn't true. I was running away. I was afraid of being ordinary." Her eyes softened, but she didn't interrupt. He continued, his voice trembling slightly. "You loved me when I had nothing, and instead of growing with you, I abandoned you. I thought if I could become someone important, it would all make sense one day. But it doesn't. None of it does." A silence followed, deep, full, necessary. Rachel's gaze lingered on him. Then she said quietly, "I forgave you a long time ago, Aaron." He looked up, startled. "You did?" "Yes," she said simply. "Not because you asked me to. but because holding on to anger was killing the part of me that still believed in love. He blinked hard, the faint sting of tears rising behind his eyes. They stood like that, two people once bound by love, now connected by something even deeper, understanding. Rachel reached for her glass of water, her hand slightly trembling. "You know," she said, her tone lighter now, "I prayed for you. Even after everything." Aaron let out a shaky laugh. "I'm not sure I deserved that." "It wasn't about deserving," she said. "It was about letting go." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He looked at her, really looked, at the calm in her eyes, the life she carried, the quiet grace that had always been there, hidden beneath the noise of his ambition. And for the first time in a long time, Aaron felt small in the best possible way. A faint voice called Rachel's name from behind them. She turned. A man stood a few steps away, holding a small bouquet of white lilies. He was tall, gentle-faced, dressed simply. Her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Aaron," she said softly, "this is Daniel." Aaron's stomach tightened. Daniel smiled politely and extended his hand. "You must be Aaron. I've heard a lot about you." Aaron forced a smile and shook his hand. "All good things, I hope." Daniel chuckled. "Only the kind that make a man seem human." There was no arrogance in his tone, no hostility, just warmth. Rachel rested her hand lightly on Daniel's arm. The gesture was small but intimate, the kind of touch that said home. And just like that, Aaron understood. Rachel had found her peace. Her joy. Her family. He nodded, stepping back slightly. "It was good seeing you again," he said quietly. Rachel smiled. "You too, Aaron." He hesitated, then added, "You look happy." "I'm glad." "Thank you," she replied. "You will be too, one day." He wanted to believe her. She and Daniel turned to leave, walking slowly through the glow of the gallery lights. Aaron watched them go, her black dress gliding softly as her hand remained over her belly. Something inside him shifted, not a sharp pain, but a release. He realized that love didn't always end with reunion. Sometimes, it ended with understanding and peace. Later that night, Aaron walked home under a gentle drizzle. The rain clung to his hair, the air heavy with city sounds, horns, footsteps, the whisper of distant music. He stopped at a street corner, staring up at the skyscraper that bore his company's name. He had built everything he thought he wanted. But now, all he could think about was how love had been the one thing he never learned to protect. He smiled faintly through the ache, whispering to himself, "I'm proud of you, Rachel." The rain fell harder, blurring the lights. And somewhere between sorrow and acceptance, he felt something close to peace for the first time in years. Rain had fallen all night. By morning, the city awoke under a thin veil of mist, the kind that softens even the hardest corners of glass towers. Aaron stood by the window of his penthouse, coffee untouched in his hands. The skyline stretched endlessly before him, but for the first time, he didn't feel small beneath it. Something had changed since that night at the gallery. It wasn't relief, not even closure, it was acceptance. For years, he'd lived like a man sprinting from his own shadow. But now, as the fog rolled over the city, Aaron felt the first trace of stillness. He had seen her, Rachel, living, breathing, glowing with a joy that didn't need him anymore. And instead of bitterness, he felt gratitude. Because in some quiet way, seeing her happy had set him free. He kept busy for the next few weeks, but everything began to feel different. He no longer chased every meeting or signed every deal like his worth depended on it. He started walking to work instead of taking the car, taking time to notice people, mothers pushing strollers, kids laughing on their way to school, strangers holding hands. He had spent so many years chasing numbers and recognition that he had forgotten how to notice life. Now, he was learning again. He even began donating quietly to the same school Rachel taught at. No name, no note. Just quiet support. He didn't do it for forgiveness. He did it because it felt right. Then, one morning, his assistant knocked gently on his office door. "Sir," she said softly, "a letter came for you." No sender name. Aaron frowned. Hardly anyone sent handwritten letters anymore. He reached for it, noticing the soft cream envelope, the neat handwriting, familiar, yet distant. He unfolded it slowly. Inside were only a few lines, written with a tenderness that felt like time itself had been kind enough to deliver it. Aaron, if this reaches you, it means I've given birth safely. A little girl. We named her Hope. I thought you should know, because she is proof that good things can still come from broken stories. I wanted to thank you not for leaving, but for becoming the lesson that taught me to love without fear. And I wanted to tell you that forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's remembering differently. Be kind to yourself. Rachel. Aaron's eyes blurred. He read the letter again, slower this time, each word sinking deeper into him. When he reached "We named her Hope," something broke softly inside his chest. He closed his eyes, a tear tracing down his cheek. For the first time, the ache in his heart didn't feel like punishment, it felt like growth. He whispered the name under his breath. Hope. It felt right. It felt like a benediction. That evening, he went for a walk. The city was alive, car lights flickering through puddles, neon reflections dancing against the wet pavement. He walked without direction, letting his thoughts drift. He thought about the early days with Rachel, their small apartment, their dreams stitched together with laughter and struggle. He thought about how she used to place her hand on his chest and say, "Don't run ahead of love." He hadn't understood it then. But now, he did. Love wasn't something to win. It was something to honor. He stopped by a small flower shop at the corner and bought a single white lily. Rachel had always loved lilies, she said they reminded her of grace that blooms even in silence. He walked to the little church near the edge of the park, the same one they used to visit on quiet Sunday mornings. He placed the lily by the altar, whispered a prayer, and sat in the back pew, staring at the flickering candlelight. An elderly woman entered and sat a few rows away. After a moment, she turned to him. "You look like a man with too much in his heart," she said kindly. Aaron smiled faintly. "Maybe I am." The woman nodded. "Then you're alive." Her words were simple, but they sank deep. He looked at the altar again, at the way the candle flame bent with the breeze but never went out. And in that moment, Aaron realized something he had never understood before, that some people enter your life not to stay, but to awaken you. Rachel had been that for him. She had been the beginning of everything good he would ever learn. Weeks passed into months. Aaron started visiting the school occasionally, not as the CEO, not as a benefactor, just as a man trying to reconnect with purpose. He volunteered for reading sessions, brought new books for the children, and stayed longer than he needed to, listening to their laughter. One afternoon, he saw Rachel from afar, across the playground, holding her baby in her arms, talking with Daniel. She looked different now, even more radiant, her face aglow with maternal warmth. Daniel was smiling beside her, his arm resting lightly around her shoulders. Aaron didn't go closer. He didn't need to. Just seeing them like that, complete, content, peaceful, was enough. He smiled, placed his hands in his pockets, and quietly turned to leave. For the first time, walking away didn't feel like loss. It felt like love fulfilled. That night, Aaron sat by his window again. But instead of staring at the city, he was writing, something he hadn't done in years. He began with a single line. To the woman who taught me that love is not ownership, it's gratitude. The words flowed easily. They weren't letters of regret, but reflections of grace. He wrote about forgiveness, about peace, about how sometimes God lets things fall apart so something true can grow from the ruins. When he was done, he folded the paper neatly and placed it inside the drawer. He didn't plan to send it. Some words are meant to be prayers, not messages. As the night deepened, a soft rain began again. Aaron stood on his balcony, feeling the cool droplets on his skin. The city lights shimmered below like stars fallen to earth. He closed his eyes and thought of Rachel, not with longing anymore, but with gratitude. He thought of the life he once had, the mistakes he made, and the mercy he'd been given through her grace. He whispered, "Thank you," to the night, not knowing if it reached her, but knowing it didn't need to. Because love, he had finally learned, isn't about holding on. It's about honoring what was, and letting it teach you how to become someone better. The following week, a small envelope arrived at Rachel's school office. No sender's name. Just one line written in Aaron's familiar handwriting. For Hope, may she grow up knowing that her name was once a prayer answered. Inside was a small, hand-carved wooden angel holding a lily. Rachel smiled when she saw it. Daniel looked over her shoulder and smiled too. "It's from him." She nodded. "Yes." She placed the angel on the shelf above Hope's crib that evening, the baby sleeping peacefully beside her. For a long moment, Rachel stood there, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall. Then she looked out the window toward the city lights and whispered, "Thank you, Aaron." It wasn't a whisper of love. It was one of peace. Years later, people would tell stories about Aaron, about how the ruthless CEO had turned into a quiet philanthropist, funding schools, orphanages, and art programs across the city. When asked what changed him, he always smiled faintly and said, "A letter." No one ever knew what letter he meant. And he never explained. But sometimes, late at night, he would take out that old envelope from Rachel, read her words once more, and whisper the same name that once made him weep. Hope. Because that's what she had given him, not through love regained, but through love transformed. And for the rest of his life, he carried it with him, the quiet knowledge that sometimes, the most beautiful stories aren't the ones that end in reunion, but the ones that end in redemption.